Hi folks, we're starting out the book with Chapter 1, Introduction to Learning Theory and Technology. Dr. Harasim started out the book with a quote about theory from Albert Einstein because theory is the main purpose of this chapter. Here we have the key points of the chapter. It's all about learning theory and the learning theories that developed in the 20th and 21st century. Our first section is Introduction to Learning Theory in the Knowledge Age, and the author spends time discussing the computer networking revolution, that we have all these different ways of being interconnected and all these different tools at our disposal, and they have changed so much about the world that we're in. And I pulled out a quote from her. It is critical and timely to study the intersection of learning theory and technology, because it's really important that so much of the world has changed that we should look at learning theory and evaluate different changes we may need to make to learning theory to deal with and accommodate all these changes in technology and new possibilities that exist. So, what is learning theory? Well, before we define learning theory, we first have to define theory. You may remember from a distant science class, string theory or the theory of relativity. Well, a theory is an explanation for why something occurs or how it occurs. A theory of learning, then, is to help us understand how people learn. There's another quote from Einstein in the chapter. Theory provides the framework or lens for our observations. And I've included a chart from the book that talks about the role of theory. What does it explain? It's all those good newspaper reporter questions, the why, how, where, when, what. What does the theory provide? It's a framework or a guide, a way to view things. It shapes our understanding and discourse or ideas we might have about something. Basically, whatever theory we use shapes how we design and implement the way that we teach. A theory is actually built from three main aspects. There's epistemology, which we'll touch on in a moment. Then there's the science component, which is built up from a body of research or experiments that have been done. And then there's the knowledge community, which is the work of experts in the field. Now back to epistemology. So what is it? It's a view of the nature of knowledge. It's a philosophy of knowledge that asks, what is knowledge? How do we know? A learning theory is more than just the epistemology of learning, because the learning theory deals with the empirical, what's observable, what's recordable, or can be verified by experience. We've moved on to the aspect of science. Originally, metaphysics was the dominant view. God was seen as the sole authority of everything, and knowledge, like cleanliness, was considered next to godliness. This changed during the Age of Enlightenment, when scientific methods were developed. And by the 19th century, scientific methods were applied to learning. The author again reminded us that theories of learning are not the same thing as philosophies of learning. The last aspect was knowledge communities. And basically, knowledge communities are scholarly groups of a particular field or a discipline, and all different fields have them. Their members, through their works and efforts, define what is the latest information on a particular field, and they work to advance the field. Moving on to the 20th century, There were three main learning theories: the behaviorist theory, the cognitivist theory, and the constructivist theory. The first was the behaviorist learning theory. It began in the late 1800s, and you might remember from an education fundamentals class the names Pavlov or Skinner. The behaviorists were focused on behavior, how to change it, how to shape it, how to modify it, how to get the behavior that they want out of the subject. Learning was seen as a behavior that could be trained, just like Pavlov trained his dogs to drool when they heard a ringing bell. The behaviorists focused only on what could be seen and observed. What went on in the mind was not that important because they couldn't see in the mind. The next theory to come along was the cognitivist learning theory. There is no particular start or stop date between theories. One sort of flows into another and develops over time. The supporters of this theory felt that the behaviorist theory was too limited. Thinking and learning were more than just behaviors to be modified. The cognitivists were concerned with what actually went on in the mind. With the growth of early computing machines, the metaphor of the mind as computer grew. The thought was facts went into the mind, were processed in the brain, and out pops knowledge. The constructivist learning theory developed from behaviorism and cognitivism. Its supporters stressed the mind is more than a computer and humans aren't robots. In their view, we create our own knowledge, and that people learn by constructing their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiences and reflecting back on those experiences. You might remember Piaget and Vygotsky as two important supporters of constructivist learning theory. We've made it to the 21st century, and now the last two learning theories, connectivism and collaborativism. Both these theories build on past theories, but with consideration towards our modern, technologically connected world. Connectivism drew attention back in 2004. Its supporters say that learning is a process of connecting to nodes of information. They also say learning is not only within the human learner, but also within non-human appliances where information may be held. They go on to suggest that a human teacher might not be the best instructor, that their role could be better accomplished through using intelligent networks. Collaborativism used to be known as online collaborative learning theory. It focuses less on textbook facts and more on the process of building knowledge. The author states that collaborativist theory says learning should take place in a process of social and conceptual development based on knowledge discourse. Collaborativism works well with today's connected information sharing world. Here's a chart from the book showing all the different theories we've discussed, the different distinguishing characteristics of them, and how they relate to each other. You might notice that the two 21st century theories don't appear on the chart. Instead, it has the old name, Online Collaborative Learning Theory. I wondered why the two newer theories were omitted and did a little looking around and found that this same chart was used in the older version of our textbook, and the author forgot to update it. I guess that'll change in the third edition. Chapter 1 briefly introduced several topics that will be covered more in depth later in the book.